Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're tackling something you probably think about more than you realize.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it's about how much we can actually trust machine learning,
Okay.
especially when things get a little unpredictable.
I like it.
So to really dig into this, we've got this super interesting research paper. It's called When to Accept Automated Predictions and When to Defer to Human Judgment.
Catchy title.
Right. So it dives into some seriously cool questions like, can we measure how much we should trust a machine learning model?
Mm.
And what does that even mean, trusting an AI?
Well, it's a question that's becoming more and more crucial, as AI pops up in more fields.
Definitely.
It's interesting, though. It's not just about the AI being right or wrong. It's about knowing when it's likely to be either one.
Oh, I see. So like knowing when to take it with a grain of salt. Okay, so imagine this. You've got this spam filter you trained 5 years ago. It was probably amazing at catching all those classic spam emails like, you've won the lottery or, those Nigerian prince scams.
Right.
But think about it now, 5 years later, spammers have gotten, well, more creative.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of what we call distribution shift.
Okay, so the world changed and the AI is stuck in the past.
In a way, yeah. The AI learned on one type of data, but the real world, well, it evolved.
Yeah, I can throw things off, right?
Yeah. Especially when you think about the big stuff, self-driving cars, medical diagnoses.
Right, the stakes are way higher than just missing a spam email.
Definitely.
So how does this research try to solve this problem?
They use a really interesting approach using something called softmax distance.
Softmax distance.
Yeah, think of it like this. It's a way to measure the AI's confidence. So instead of just saying this is a cat, it gives us a probability. Like, I'm 80% sure this is a cat, 15% a dog, 5% a dust bunny.
Oh, so it's not just the winner, we get all the options.
Right. And how likely the AI thinks each one is.
But how does that tell us when to trust it?
Well, they use those probabilities to create a kind of safety threshold.
A safety threshold.
Yeah, it's based on how far off the AI's wrong predictions were, like a buffer zone.
Hold on, so they're using the wrong answers to figure out when to trust it.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, but it makes sense.
Okay, I'm curious. How do they test this out?
They use two classic data sets. MNRAST, which is all about recognizing handwritten digits,
Okay, digits.
and CIFAR-10. That one has pictures of cats, dogs, planes, things like that.
So you can visualize what the AI is trying to do?
Exactly.
I remember M and REST. Those digits can be messy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Handwriting varies so much.
Yeah, so what did they find?
Well, their method was really good at flagging those iffy predictions,
Iffy.
the ones we might not want to trust blindly. Only a tiny fraction of the correct ones ended up in that buffer zone.
Interesting. So it avoids being overconfident.
Yeah, you could say that. But they also found something else. The digit 8 was the most misclassified in the MIS tests.
An 8. Is there something about 8s that AIs struggle with?
It turns out some things are just harder for AI to categorize.
Like a handwritten 8, which can look like a 0 or a 9, maybe?
Exactly. It comes down to what we call cluster tightness, how similar the correct predictions are to each other.
Tightness.
Yeah, like imagine a scatter plot where each point is a handwritten 1. If they all look pretty similar, they form a tight cluster, and the AI is more confident.
Okay.
But if they're all over the place, like with 8s, that cluster is looser,
Mm-hmm.
and the AI gets less sure.
Makes sense. So if the 8s are all over the place, it's harder for the AI to know what makes an 8 an 8.
Precisely.
So what happens when you mess with that safety threshold?
They found that lowering it didn't really hurt accuracy for those well-defined cat and berries.
So for tight clusters, you could be a little less strict and still trust the AI?
Exactly. So just some flexibility, right?
Very cool. So we've got this tool that can help measure AI confidence and decide when to double check things. But where does this leave us in the real world? How would we use this? I imagine this could have some pretty big implications.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive. Buckle up. We're going to look at how this research could change the way we think about AI in everything from healthcare to self-driving cars.
Okay, so we've got this tool to measure an AI's confidence. It's all pretty cool in theory,
Yeah.
but I'm still trying to picture how it actually works in real life.
Right.
Where does this research really fit in, in the bigger picture?
Well, just think about all the ways we already rely on AI. I mean, finance, healthcare, it's everywhere. We're using AI to make decisions that, well, they really affect people's lives.
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of everywhere you look now. But we usually just hear the final verdict, right? Like, this loan is approved, or this patient has a 90% chance of recovery.
Right, right.
We don't know how confident the AI is.
Exactly. And that's where this research comes in. It's like adding transparency. Instead of just an answer, we get an idea of how much we should trust that answer.
Okay, so more context. So instead of just a flat prediction, it's more nuanced.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine a doctor using an AI for diagnosis. It's not just, this patient has X condition, but more like, I'm 80% sure it's X, 15% Y, and 5% something else.
Oh, that's really interesting. That could actually change how a doctor approaches treatment, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it could help us use AI more responsibly, especially when a wrong prediction has, well, serious consequences.
Yeah, for sure. This makes me think about something else the paper mentioned. Using the whole Softmax output, not just the top prediction. We kind of touched on this earlier, but can you explain why those less likely outcomes are important?
So remember, Softmax gives us probabilities for each outcome, even the unlikely ones. Usually we only care about the most likely, but there's a lot of hidden info in those less likely ones.
Okay, like what?
Well, they can tell us how spread out the possibilities are, so we get a better understanding of the AI's uncertainty.
Oh, okay. So if the AI is, say, 99% sure it's a cat and everything else is basically zero, we're probably good.
Yeah.
But if it's more like 60% cat, 30% dog, and then 10% who knows what, then we might want to be a bit more careful.
Exactly. It all goes back to that cluster tightness. Those less likely probabilities show us how spread out things are.
Like we're peeking into the AI's thought process.
Wait, exactly. And sometimes those less likely possibilities are actually more important than the top one.
Really?
Think about it. What if an AI says 95% chance this is a benign tumor, but that last 5% is split between, several very serious cancers?
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to ignore that just because the most likely outcome is good news.
That's a good point. So this Softmax output gives us a deeper understanding, but how do we use it? The paper talked about calculating distances between these outputs and centroids. What's that all about?
Okay, so think back to those clusters of correct prediction.
Each cluster has a central point, a centroid. Think of it like the average representation of that category.
So for all the handwritten eights, the centroid would be like the most typical eight the AI knows.
Exactly. And the softmax distance measures how far a given prediction is from that ideal eight.
So the further away, the less we should trust it.
Yeah, it's a good way to think about it. Like, this prediction doesn't really look like the other eights. Maybe it's a really weird eight, or maybe it's something else entirely.
And that's where our safety threshold comes back in, right?
Exactly.
It helps us decide which predictions to trust and which ones need a second look.
It's like a line in the sand. Anything beyond this point, proceed with caution.
Okay, so the softmax output, the clustering, the distances, the safety threshold, it seems like a pretty neat way to approach this problem of AI trust.
Yeah, it's a promising start, but it's important to remember, no method is perfect. There are definitely challenges to think about. Like, how do you set that safety threshold? Too strict, and you might reject too many good predictions. Too lenient, and you risk missing the bad ones.
Yeah, a tricky balance. And I'm guessing the ideal threshold would really depend on, what you're using the AI for, right? Like, the stakes are higher with medical diagnoses than, say, recommending a movie.
Oh, absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah.
And that's where human judgment is still super important. We can't just let the machines do everything. We also need to think about, well, what about unexpected or novel inputs?
You mean like if the AI sees something it's never seen before?
Exactly. Something outside its training data.
So our whole approach relies on having those clusters of known data. But what if the AI encounters something truly new?
Right. It might not have any reference point, any centroid to use. It's like the AI saying, hold on, what's this?
And it might not even be able to calculate a softmax distance, let alone know if it should trust its prediction.
Exactly. And that's why ongoing research in this area is so important. We need to keep finding new methods, refining the ones we have to make AI more, robust and reliable, especially when it comes to the unexpected.
It's amazing how far we've come already. We talked about how AI thinks and about those times when it might run into something it's never seen before.
Right.
It really shows you that this whole area of AI, of figuring out if you can trust it, it's still a work in progress.
Oh, definitely. It's
Yeah.
a really fast-moving field, and it's super exciting to see researchers come up with, creative solutions like this softmax distance method.
Yeah, speaking of that, the paper talked about using this technique for self-driving cars, which, how does that even work? It seems like a really, really complex environment.
Well, imagine a self-driving car, right? It's cruising down a busy street,
Okay.
and it's constantly making these split-second decisions. And those decisions, they're all based on predictions from its AI systems.
Right, things like, is that a person about to walk into the street? Or is that car going to swerve into my lane?
Exactly. And those predictions, they have to be super accurate
Hmm.
because, well, the consequences of a mistake could be, really bad.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's where this Softmax distance thing comes in. It can actually monitor the AI's confidence, like in real time. So if that distance is high, the car could be programmed to, I don't know, maybe slow down or even alert a human driver to take over.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like a built-in safety net.
Yeah, exactly. Like a backup plan.
This actually reminds me of another thing they mentioned in the paper. Using the Softmax output as, get this, as training data for another AI.
Oh, yeah, right.
It's like having one AI judge the trustworthiness of the first AI. It sounds crazy.
It's a cool idea. Instead of just
Yeah.
a fixed threshold, you could have this dynamic system that would be constantly learning and adapting.
Oh, that's interesting. But wouldn't that also bring up a bunch of new questions?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you even train that second AI, the watchdog AI?
Right.
And how can we be sure it's reliable? It seems, well, AI all the way down.
It is complex, yeah, but that's just how AI development is, right? The more sophisticated our systems get, the more we need to make sure they're safe and that we can trust them.
So we've covered a lot in this deep dive, and I think our listeners have, well, probably got a lot to think about. We just skimmed the surface of this whole AI reliability thing, but it's obviously super important, and it's only going to become more so as time goes on.
Oh, definitely.
It's not just about the tech stuff, It's about thinking about what AI really means for us, what it can and can't do,
Yeah,
and remembering that at the end of the day, we still need human judgment.
couldn't agree more.
Well, to all our listeners out there, I hope this deep dive got you thinking about AI in a new way and thinking about how to make sure we can actually trust it. As AI gets more and more woven into our lives, we got to stay informed and we got to keep asking questions. Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.